Hello, in today's lecture we're going to talk about functions. So my little subheading here, dates and strings. There's lots of functions. We're going to focus on functions related to strings and dates. We'll also do a little bit of number functions. So what are functions? So we're talking about predefined functions. These are functions that are built into MySQL. Functions have names, arguments, and return values. So the name is the name of the function. So you also need to know what it does, need to know the name of it. Now, arguments and return values, those are a little bit more difficult, but I'll try and get into them. If you've done programming before, then you probably know a little bit about arguments and return values. So return value is the thing that a function returns. An argument is what you pass to it. So you pass arguments to functions. Now, in programming, sometimes they're called parameters, sometimes they're called arguments. In the scope of this class, I'll probably just try and refer to them as arguments. But basically, so what does the function need to do its job, and what does it return, and what is its name? And these make your life easier. So using functions can help you to get things done. There are lots of them. If you want to know about MySQL functions, look in the documentation. W3 Schools is a W3 School, I think I said that, is a good resource. There's other ones all over the internet. You just went MySQL functions, Google it, you'll find a bunch of stuff. So we talked about what functions are. I'll do a bunch of examples of them today. Let's talk about strings. So we talked about strings already. So we talked about like char and varchar when we talked about creating tables. So strings are non-numeric data type. I always think of them as words, and most people think of them as words and names and such, but they could be numbers. There's no reason it couldn't be numbers. But the main thing about them is you can't do math with them. If you're storing a word or a name or a title or something like that, sure, it's a string, but it definitely could store like symbols or numbers. Now, one of the interesting things about this, and I keep talking about programming, and I know if you haven't done programming before, this doesn't help, but I do feel like I need to mention it, is in programming languages, normal programming languages, strings are always zero indexed, meaning the first character is in spot 0, and the second thing is in spot 1, and the third thing's in spot 2, right? So you start counting at 0. That's in programming. In MySQL, things are they're not zero indexed. They start at 1. So the first character is in spot 1, the second character is in spot 2. Now you're probably, I mean, if you haven't programmed before, you're like, yeah, of course, that makes sense, and that's good. This is one of those weird times where having prior programming experience actually makes this more difficult. Every time I start messing around with strings in SQL, I screw up because I always think, oh, the first thing's in spot 0, but it's actually in spot 1, so it's actually more intuitive. So you got a string. Strings have characters in them, and each character has a position. And so it's not zero indexed, which feels so weird to say because this isn't a programming class, but I also know that some of you have done some programming, so I do need to draw attention to it. So let's talk about string functions. String functions are functions that operate on strings. So you pass them strings as arguments, and the return types vary. So it might return a string, it might return a number. It depends on the string. But they're string functions because they operate on strings, right? You pass it a string and it does something. Now, probably I don't know if there's such a thing as the most important one. If there is, this is the most important, and it's called the concat function. It's short for concatenate. If you've programmed before, you've heard that term concatenate. It's also a term in Excel. It's basically the fancy word for joining multiple strings together. So maybe you'd want to do something like put together a first name and a last name and make it a full name. There's all kinds of stuff you could do. Concatenation is one of the most common things you do in programming, and you'll do it a lot in this class. So the function is called concat, and then in parentheses, so when you're calling a function, it's always in parentheses, you pass it those arguments. So I'm passing it Carl, and then I'm passing it in a space, and then I'm passing it Jones. So this would say Carl space Jones. When you are sticking together multiple words, sometimes you want space between those words, sometimes you don't. Do kind of definitely be aware of that, though. You know, I mean, I don't have to tell you, but I do, that if you're putting together a first name and last name, you need a space. Right? I don't have to tell you to do that. You know that. When you see it printed out and it all runs together as one word, you'll know it's wrong. You can concatenate together as many things as you want. There's no, I don't know, there's a limit on it. So you can stick together 10 things, 2 things. Right, so that's concat. Now notice that what this looks like, this is a pretty weird looking statement, right? Select concat Carl Jones. You can do that. Notice there's no from. You can do that, and if you want to practice with these functions, you don't need a from. You can just do that, and it'll spit out Carl Jones. All right, so let's look at our first example. Say I want to display the title and cost of all books with a dollar sign in front, right? All right, let's have a look. So this is the bookstore, and this is books. And if we look at what's in here, they've got costs, but they don't have dollar signs on it. How do I put a dollar sign on it? Well, how about concat? Where am I? Sorry. Oh my gosh. All right, sorry, wrong file. I got confused. I need to close those. So display the title and cost of all books. So select title and the cost, kind of, from books. I don't have a where clause here, just select title cost from books. Let's run that. Let's see what works. So I get my cost and it looks fine, but remember I want a dollar sign on it. So I don't just want the cost, I want concat. And then the first thing I want to pass it is I treat it like a string literal, so I wrap it in quotes, and then I do a comma and then cost. So it's going to glue together a string literal, which is a dollar sign, with that cost. Same number, but now it has a dollar sign in front of it. Maybe you're looking at that and you're like, oh, that should have a space in front of it. Should it? I don't know. If you want it to have a space in front of it, well, then type space. It's a string literal. If you want it to have a space, it has space. So that's a concat function, right? Useful. Pretty easy. Strings got to be wrapped in quotes. Separate things with commas. Trying to think, is there anything else to say about that? Not that I can think of right now. I've got a bunch of examples, so I'm sure we'll get it. So another function, and I really like this function, it's concat underscore ws. I always think of that as like white space, but it's not. It's with separator. So, a minute ago when I said, oh, well, if you're putting together a first name and a last name, you need a space between them. Well, this, you specify a separator. So it's like the concat function. The first thing you pass it, the first argument, is the thing that's going to separate the strings. So if you pass it like an empty space and a first and a last, it's going to go first, space, last. It doesn't have to be a space. It could be a hyphen or whatever. So this is a useful function. I like it. I'm a programmer by trade, so I'm always concatenating things, but most languages don't have a concat with separator. So it's pretty great if what you're gluing together, you want to have spaces between the arguments, which sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. You'll see. We're going to do a bunch of examples, and there's a bunch of things on your lab and your homework for the week, so you'll see. Sometimes you have a white, or sometimes you have a separator, and sometimes you don't. You don't have to use this, but it's convenient when you want it. Here's another string function. So this is the format function. So the format function takes a number, and you give it a number of decimal places, and it rounds it and returns a string. So this isn't a string function because it takes a number, but it does return a string. So this is useful when you want to specify the number of decimal places in something, basically. And important thing here, it returns a string. So when you pass something, you pass a number to the format function, it gives you back a string. So the thing you get back is not suitable for math. You'll see there's a lot of reasons why you might do this. Usually it's because you just want everything to have the same number of decimal places. I think I said that twice already. It's one of those things you have to see it. So let's do it. So concat 2. All right, display the title cost and new cost after we increase by 20%, displayed as a currency, rounded to 2 decimal places. So actually, I'm going to be, no. I was going to be lazy, but I'm not going to. Select title, cost, and then the new cost. And the cost is cost times 1.2. That's how you say increase by 20% from books. And that's not exactly what we wanted, but let's run it and see what we get. And so you see we've got our titles, got our costs, and notice this looks crazy, right? It's like 21.420. Right? No one displays prices with 3 decimal places. And when you multiply decimals together, you're going to get some weird number of decimal places, and it just looks ragged. So remember, we can fix this with that format function. So I call the format function. And I'm going to pass it that value. That's the first argument. And the second argument's 2. Right? So I'm saying I only want 2 decimal places. And now it looks way less gross. Right? It looks more uniform. That's nice. Now also remember, I also want a dollar sign on it. So this whole thing is now going to be inside of a concat. and the first thing I want to pass it is a dollar sign, I'll do a space because I'm feeling like it, comma to separate those values, and then that big concat function encloses this whole thing. So I've got one function nested inside of another function, and that is called a nested function. You can see it from my output. Now it went from a minute ago, it was like 3 decimal places and looking weird, to now that looks like a legitimate price. Right, so I've got a function here, and I've got that function nested inside of another one. You definitely can do that. I just did it. It's pretty common. The only thing I have to add about that is just how easy it is to have your parentheses mismatched. So sometimes you'll have like not enough closing parentheses or one extra. You see I'm getting this little X right here. It's kind of trying to tell me that something I'm doing looks wrong. So when you have, functions inside of functions inside of functions, it does get pretty hard to manage those parentheses, but I don't really have any advice for you other than I feel you on that. It is difficult and it can get hard to keep track of. The other thing I did want to point out is notice when my selects, my froms, my keywords are all uppercase, I'm also doing my function names in uppercase as well, which you don't have to, but it's convention. If it's a defined keyword in the language, then you should uppercase it just to separate out the right, like the column aliases and the column names from the SQL. A couple other string functions. I'm not even going to do examples of these because these are very basic, but like lowercase and uppercase. So there's L case and lower and U case and upper. I'm telling you, those are the same function. They just have different names. They're pretty self-explanatory. These are used to, you pass them a string and they give you back a string and it just makes it all uppercase or all lowercase. A lot of string functions are very straightforward. Here's another one. So length or character length, not exactly the same function, but in the scope of this course, they serve the same purpose. This tells you how long a string is. Maybe you want to know how long a string is. Right? It's a function, you pass it a string, but in this thing gives you back an integer, right? Like a 7 or a 6 or a 5. That's the difference between uppercase and lowercase. So upper and lower, these give you back a string, right? You pass it a string, it gives you back a string with a specific formatting. Length function, you pass it a string and it gives you back a number. And so now I'm talking about arguments and return types. And all right, so now there's two kind of difficult string functions, and those are, the first one is substring. This one's very useful. This is used to take a string and chop it into pieces. In other words, it extracts a substring from a string. This function takes 3 arguments: the string that you want to chop up, the position where you want to start cutting it up, and then the length. Length is optional. If you don't specify the length, it'll just go to the end of the string. So, right, here's a string, right, called string. You see its index positions. Also, one of the interesting things about SQL is, like that's position 1, that's position 2, that's position 3, that's position 13. You can use negative numbers to work the other way. So we always think of counting from the left to the right. If you want to go from the right to the left, you can use negative values. And those definitely have a time and a place. This little graphic here does a good job of showing you those positions. So substring is used to chop up a string. Let's do this one here. This is a weird one, but it's a good one to demonstrate it with. So what will it display? All right, so I commented these out, so I'm just going to uncomment them. This is a good example of comments being used to not have documentation in the code, but just code not being run. So on this first one here, I'm calling substring. The string is MySQL string functions. I pass it a 7 and a 6. That means go to spot 7, give me 6 characters. I run it and it gives me string. Right, so this S in string is the 7th character, and it gives me that. These are weird examples, right? What is this? Oh, select. I could tell because it was red. So now I'm doing MySQL string functions. Start at spot 1 and give me 5. So that gives me MySQL, right? It goes to spot 1, it gives me 5, which is MySQL. And then the last one. So I want to go to spot 7, and notice I'm not specifying. That third argument's just not there. So it's going to go to the 7th character, and it's just going to give me everything past that point. Right here, I saw that 7 was string, but instead of only going 6 characters, I go to the end of the string. These are weird examples, and they make the substring function seem like it doesn't really have a purpose, but It definitely does. That's just a good way to practice it and illustrate the way that it works. Most of the time when you do a substring, it's an important part of a solution as opposed to just some weird little, what will this produce? Not to say that I wouldn't put something on a quiz or a test or something like that, but this has a lot of practical uses, not just this kind of weird example. So now we're going to get into more practical applications of substring. So there was that one, just how does it work? So write a statement that will return the first initial and last name of every customer. Now, why would you want to do this? I don't know. That's really not a question I'm here to answer, but let's do it. All right, so we want the first initial and last initial of every customer. Select. Well, if you want to rip a string apart, it's substra. I don't know. I say substrate. You can, I guess it doesn't say it anywhere, but you can also just call it substring. Um, First name. I want to go to the first character, and I want one character. And subster, last name. And I want to go to the first character, and I want one character. From customers. And let's run it and see what we get. Really exciting, right? Now you've got everything you need. Just kidding. Right? So why would you want to do that? I don't know why you'd want to do that, but that's an example of taking a string and ripping it apart. This was more interesting if you're kind of just taking this string literal and tearing it to pieces, but here we're taking a field in a database and tearing it to pieces. So another practical example, I believe, is the next thing. Oh, well, actually, this is even less practical. This is just dumb. But I'm trying to do simple examples so they're easy to follow. So write a statement that will return the first initial and last name of every customer in lowercase. All right, first initial and last name in lowercase. So select, and so I didn't really say what we're going to do here. I will say first initial, so I'll say substring first name 1 1, you know that game, and then last name from customers. That's kind of what I said we want to do, but I don't really think that's exactly what I want to do. I wanted it all in lowercase, so I wasn't really clear about what I'm thinking. Should I nest this in lowercase and put that in lowercase, or should I? I don't know. I mean, I guess that's kind of what it says to do. Is that? I think that's what it says. That's also why I give you pictures so you can see. All right, so now everything's lowercase. But hey, why not take this whole thing and wrap it in a concat? And while we're at it, let's do concat ws and put a space in there as our separator. And you'll see what this does. And this gives us that. Is that what I wanted? I don't know. It was pretty vague, right? I just wanted to show you I haven't done one of those upper or lower functions, so now you've seen one of those. Also notice that this column name is absolute garbage. You definitely would want to alias that. And so I will, and it'll look less ridiculous, and I will be a little bit happy. There we go, looking better. All right. Another function that I'm not going to use, and you probably won't use much, is the left function. So the left function, you give it a string and the number of characters, and it'll grab that number of characters from the left of the string. Why not just use a substring? Well, I guess this is technically a little easier, and it's easier to read. But I would rather use a substring function. There's also a right function, and you can imagine what that does. That takes characters from the right. Again, I'm going to use substring because substrings are really useful function, and I think your best bet is just to get good at using the substring function rather than use your lefts and your rights. But you can. On an assignment, if you needed to do something like that, you can use either one of those. All right, and now the last set of string functions we're going to learn. So substring was more complicated than things like upper and lower, is locate. So locate and position, these functions do the same thing, but I'm going to use the locate function, not the position function. They do the same thing. Position is in your textbook. In position, you have a string and use the in operator. So you say you're looking for this thing in this thing. I'm just going to use locate. So the locate function, you pass it a substring, in other words, the thing that you're looking for, and then the string that you want to search. And then start is optional. This is like if you don't want to start at the first character, then you specify that you want to start at some other character. And so this will return a number. It returns the position of the first instance of that character in the string. So like if we were searching Mississippi, it would return the index position of the first S. It's important to understand how your functions work because you might think it would return the last one or the first one, or there's all kinds of things it could do, but what it does is it returns the first instance of that substring in the string. Oftentimes we're looking for just a single character in a string, but you could be looking for an entire word in a sentence or anything like that. And so we're going to look at some locate examples, and we're going to do the same kind of cheesy little, MySQL string functions kind of thing that we did before, because these are harmless and easy. So they're all commented out. So let's do the first one. So the first one is saying locate S in MySQL string functions. We run it and it returns 3. Sorry for the silence. I was really confused. I don't know what's going on with my brain right now. I was like, there's not an S in third position. There definitely is. I was just getting caught on the case sensitivity thing. Remember, using the collation we're using, uh, everything's case insensitive. So yes, there is an S in the third spot. I was really looking at that thinking, oh my gosh, why is it saying that? Well, because there is an S in the third spot. And now here I ran it again. So I said, where's an S in MySQL string functions? But this time I said start in spot 8, right? Which is somewhere around here. And so in this instance, it gives me the S at the very end of the string because I said don't start at the beginning. And the last one, we're looking for the word strung. And if it doesn't find it, you see it gives you a 0. That's probably what you would have guessed. It's not an error, right? So here, found the first one. Here I said, hey, I gave it an offset, and I said start here, or somewhere around here in the string. And I found the one at the end, and here I looked for something that I couldn't find. All right, so that's locate. Let's look at a practical locate example. So return all the addresses that have a PO box. How can we do this? So as we work our way through this class, we start to get to questions which aren't so straightforward. Return all the addresses that have a PO box. Well, let's just start with what we can. Let's write the select. Select address from customers. But we're going to have a where clause this time. All right, we only want the ones with a PO box. And so if we look at customers, they have addresses, and you see what the PO starts to look like. So if they have a PO box, it's always in the beginning of the string, and it's always the first 4 characters. It's P.O. right? So we want every address that starts with P.O. So where substring address 1, see, I almost did it, where the first 4 characters are equal to P.O. And that's how we can determine who has a PO box. And so there's all the addresses that have a PO box in them. And on to the last one, calling it the summative example. So display the box numbers for customers with a PO box. So this is a weird one, and a lot of these questions are weird just because that's all I have in the table. So I only want the box number from customers with a PO box. So I know how to get only the people that have a PO box because I just did that a minute ago. And it is lazy and I don't love what I'm doing. I just copied it because it's a good start, right? But I only want to display the box number. Now the box number is pretty difficult actually. You see, when we were looking at the addresses, it was easy enough to see who had a PO box because it was looking at the first 4 characters and we're looking for PO. But grabbing the box number is not so easy. You can see it in these first 3 rows here. One has 3 digits, one has 4 digits, one has 2 digits. So we can't just say, grab the last 4 characters or the last 3 characters. So I'm going to come about it from the other direction. If we go this way, you can see the first 4 characters is P.O, and the 5th is a space, the 6th is a B, the 7th is an O, the 8th is an X, Right, so the first 8 characters are PO box, and then it's a space, which is 9. So if we want the box, we have to just, we're going to use substring, and we're going to attack it from the normal side, right, from the left side, but we're just going to use an offset of 9. I think it's 9. I'm not a machine. I make mistakes too. So substring address 9. Let's see how that works. And run this, and it looks like it worked, right? 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2. You remember there was 3 digits, 4 digits, 2 digits. So all it did, so it grabbed every customer that started with PO, and all it returned is the box. Now, why would you ever do that? Well, you wouldn't, but maybe the post office would, and that's a more practical example of the substring function. The last one I want to show you is just the round function. So remember I showed you the format function earlier, and the format function we use to take a number and turn it into a string with a specified number of decimal places. The round function is very similar. It's used to round a number. The difference is it returns a number. So if the thing that you want back after rounding, if you want to do math with it, then you use the round function instead of the format function. To be honest, I find myself using the format function a lot more than the round function. These are really cousin functions, but this is a function that returns a number, and I don't even have an example of it. All right, so now we've talked about, that's as far as we're going with number functions, and we've talked a lot about string functions, and then the last group of functions, and it's a big one, is date functions.